Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you are in the world right now. It's happy hour, 5 o'clock on the U.S. East Coast, and good afternoon to you. I'm Mark Gillespie in the WhiskyCast studio. This is a very special day for us every year on November 12th because 16 years ago today, the very first episode of WhiskyCast hit the air. And no, I will not play that opening theme song. God, I still have nightmares about that original theme song we used, but it was free at the time, and that's what counted. But 16 years later, we are the longest running and oldest whiskey podcast there is out there. And yes, I am still recovering from the hashtag concussion from hell. So this is going to be interesting because we're going to be juggling 4 guests today. And I want to thank, first of all, everybody for their messages the last few days and few weeks as I've been recovering, because this has not been fun. I was at Mount Vernon on Sunday. If you heard the podcast that dropped yesterday, well, by all that's holy, that thing should have come out Monday night, Tuesday morning, but I came back from Mount Vernon Sunday night and just felt like crap. So it came out yesterday, and I am working through this thing. Concussions take time to heal, folks, and I'm glad I'm back doing the webcasts. We're going to make a decision on the webcasts going forward week by week, depending on how I feel going through the holidays, just to get through this time period. But we'll see how things go. And as the comments are coming in right now, Dave Kuhn says I should drink whiskeys that are all 16 years old for this one. We're not going to do that, but I'll explain why in just a few minutes. And thanks to everyone for this. And James Clapsaddle, just hearing the theme music marks the beginning of the weekend for him. Captain Concussion, thanks, Crump. I really appreciate that one. And lots of comments from all of you, and I really do appreciate it. And Dave Kuhn says, having some Longmorn 16 in your honor, sir. Thanks, Dave. Longmorn 16, one of my favorites. That's a good dram to have. But let's bring in our first set of guests right now, because tomorrow's going to be a fun day at Sagamore Spirit down in Baltimore. We've got Brian Treacy and Ryan Norwood joining us. Ryan is at the distillery in Baltimore. Brian is at home. And let's talk about Penny's Proof. The annual release day is tomorrow, and I've had people asking if I was going to be able to make the trip down to Baltimore, and obviously I'm not going to be able to like we did last year. But explain Penny's Proof, race, basically, for those who are not familiar with this.
Yeah. First off, thanks for having us, Mark, and congratulations on 16 years. That is a major accomplishment and a true trailblazer. So, and thank you for having us on. So, for those who aren't familiar with Penny's Proof, it's a release that we started. This will be our 3rd year. And what we do is we release a 3-pack of 200 milliliter samples of our whiskey. And we call it basically sip, share, and savor. And the idea is you can sip one now, share one with a friend, and savor one and follow along the aging journey. So it was, we have a group called Whiskey Thieves that are extreme loyalists to Sagamore Spirit. And we got a lot of questions. As you know, when we first started out, with MGP. And as we got our distillery up and running. And so people were very anxious and wanting to know, when are we going to be able to drink your distilled, your aged whiskey? And we thought it's a little risky, but we thought, why don't we bring them along the journey for full transparency and give them a chance to see that the whiskey we're making, we're proud of, but you can also see why maybe it's not on the market yet. And so we released the first year, like I said, 3 years ago, it was 2.5-year-old rye whiskey. Last year was 3.5-year-old rye whiskey. And this year kind of marks us kind of closing out the chapter. Now that we've hit the milestone of 4.5-year-old whiskey, we're going to go ahead and put it in the bottle. So it's a really fun way for people to follow along with that aging process, be very transparent with them along the way, give them a glimpse into what we're doing. And then, at the end of the day, our beautiful column still, we named her Penny. She's beautiful and shiny and copper like a penny. And then, like I said, we sell all this whiskey to our whiskey thieves. You can get a 3-pack if you're the first 597 people in line, and you can buy it for 1 penny.
Which is the best deal in whiskey, I think, right now.
It's a pretty good deal.
But then, Ryan, you've got something else coming out tomorrow, too, that you didn't tell everybody about.
Yeah.
Let's talk about this one.
This is another one we're super excited about. And as Brian said, we've tried to be as transparent as we could through this whole process. And so this is an exciting milestone for us, is getting our whiskey that we distilled here in Maryland to a minimum 4-year-old product. And part of that was our excitement to release our first bottled and bond. And so one of the things that we did was we worked to go through our batches. And what I was just telling Mark was that we're really excited because when we first started, we did our first batch of whiskey in April of 2017. And as we've gone through the tasting process and the evaluation, we're really, really happy with where this is. And we thought that one fun way to really bring people in is to release our first bottle and bond. So this is a 4 to 4.5-year-old whiskey, all distilled and aged here in the state of Maryland by Sagamore Spirit at 100 proof. And we have a very, very small allotment that we made of this that will be sold here locally at the distillery tomorrow for anybody that comes by. And then also it'll be available in just a handful of local markets as well. So
I'm tasting the 4.5-year-old pennies proof, and essentially this is a lot. These two are very similar, the bottled and bond and the 4.5-year-old pennies proof, right?
Yes, they're very similar. I mean, they're the same mash bill. Obviously, the proof is different, and they are from different batches off our still. The bottle and bond is actually, I was telling Mark earlier, that is from our very first batch that we cooked on the still, which I'm actually surprised to say at this point, because if anybody has ever commissioned equipment or gone through the process of starting something up, those first few batches are sometimes not your best, but we were excited as we tasted through this process. We tasted it at 2 years. It was fantastic. It was heading in the right direction. And then when we tasted it at 4 years, we were really happy with it. And so we wanted to use that and showcase that. And hopefully as we kind of got our feet underneath us and learned the equipment a little bit, it'll continue to get better and progress along with us.
One of the things I find interesting with the pennies proof releases at 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5 was just that ability to compare as the whiskey is maturing as it goes along. Because I remember tasting the 3.5 last year with you guys when we did the live webcast from the distillery on pennies proof morning, and this has really matured over that last year. That extra year really gave it a nice boost.
Yeah, I think I'm hoping some of those have been lucky enough to actually get all 3 series. I can see tomorrow night them at home putting out 2.5, 3.5, and 4.5, and seeing that evolution of complexity kind of come through and really see how that whiskey gets structured and more flavor as time goes on. And ideally appreciate us waiting the 4.5 years, because it's definitely a much better product, obviously. And that's why we didn't ever release it before. It just, we all know whiskey needs time, right?
We have a comment from Greg Serafian in Paris. He loves the bottle shape for Sagamore rye. He's hoping to see it in France someday. And we also had a comment from Watchman 999 about you guys not being available in Canada yet. When might you start exporting some of this?
So the good news is, we are in the UK and we just got to Germany. And now with the tariffs kind of being eased, we're looking at maybe potentially expanding. France has been a conversation. Nothing really going on quite yet, but it has definitely come up in the conversation. When you look at the world's consumption of whiskey, France is a leader there. So something that we feel might be a good place for us someday. And then, we recently did get to the LCBO and the SAQ, but not anything in British Columbia or so. But, we got there basically in February of 2020, and that kind of halted a lot of things for us. So, but now that things seem to be easing and stabilizing, which we're really thankful for, I'm actually headed to Canada in 2 weeks with a Discus seminar to help try and start getting the brand off the ground. And then you can also find us in China, Japan, and in the Philippines, and New Zealand, thanks to your connection, Mark.
Yeah, we put you guys in touch with the folks at Whiskey Galore down in Christchurch, and Unfortunately, I'm not going to be going down for Dram Fest next February, but would love to go down there for that. But I'm sure they'll be pouring some down there. And Dave Kuhn wants to know any special finishes on these new releases. These are not finished. These are pretty much essentially, for lack of a better term, straight whiskeys, right?
No, I think that is the term. They are straight rye whiskeys. There are two blends of mash bills. So we do a high rye and a low rye blended together. Our high rye is at 95% rye, 5% malted barley. And our low rye is a 52% rye, 5% malted barley, and 43% corn. So we cook them, ferment them, distill them, and age them completely separately. And then on the back end, we dump them and then blend them to a flavor profile that we feel is representative of a Maryland style rye whiskey.
Now, when will you start blending more of the whiskey that's coming off of Penny, you're still in Baltimore, into your regular releases?
So we've actually started doing that already. So it's exciting for us. We wanted to be able to start showcasing our whiskey and know that, whenever you're doing that, it's a balance of inventory. It's a balance of understanding what that flavor impact is going to have. And so we've started doing that already. And in any of our products that we're putting out in the market right now, there is about 15 to 20% of our whiskey that we made and distilled here in Maryland.
Okay, great. Guys, I want you to stand by for just a minute. I'm going to put you back off into the back rooms here in the backstage while I bring in our other guests right now, because one of the things I really love is collaborations. And let me pull you guys out of the room here for just a second here. And we have a couple of folks that have collaborated on another great project here. Our pals, Nicole Austin from George Dickel and Cascade Hollow Distilling Company in Tennessee, and Todd Leopold from Leopold Brothers in Denver. They've collaborated on this very special rye. Tell me about the collaboration blend. Nicole, let's start with you.
So excited to be here. And first off, congratulations on 16 years.
Thank you.
That's no small feat. It's pretty amazing. I feel like I'm among greats here. I'm like a baby in the whiskey industry compared to you two. Now this blend is something that Todd and I are both like, every time you release a new whiskey, you have to talk about it a lot. And I just do not get bored talking about this one. I am so thrilled. I'm so excited about it. This is, I think how big of a deal it is, for a company like Diageo to partner with an independent family-owned distiller like Leopold Brothers.
It's a surprise. I don't think anybody expected it. Anybody saw this coming, frankly.
Listen, it wasn't easy, but it was not easy. But I just felt so strongly about this. I thought it was such an incredible opportunity to. I think talking about Maryland rye is a perfect segue actually into talking about this, because something that always really excited me, as a craft spirits producer in New York, was the idea of this like lost era in American distilling where things were more diverse, that there was a wider range of flavors and types and regions that were producing whiskey, and that sort of elusive lost whiskey was some of the best whiskey in the world. And that legend kind of made us producers, that were just getting into the business, feel like there was room for us, that we belonged, that there was a place for us. It was, we clung to this history, I think, partly because it meant that we were going to be okay, that there was room. And so I hold a real special place in my heart for that. And so when Todd called me up about an opportunity to, blend his 3-chamber rye, which I'm definitely going to let him describe because he does a better job, but to blend it with, my own rye whiskey from Cascade Hollow as a column distilled rye, that it was a collaboration that had a real purpose in resurrecting this historic style. So that was something that was really exciting for me. And it was an opportunity I couldn't pass up, no matter how difficult it was to get all the ducks in a row.
I love the aroma on this. Todd, tell us about doing this from your end.
Well, it was just a bit of a happy accident in the sense that we were preparing about a year out from releasing the 3-chamber rye, and part of the history of the 3-chamber still isn't just selling it on its own. It's to sell a portion of the 3-chamber and blend it together with column still was very common all the way back into the 1800s. And basically, Nicole was the very first phone call that I made. And it was a funny one, of course, because I didn't think that they had made any rye at Cascade Hollow, so it was a bit of an aside after I had sent her out a sample of the 3-chamber to, kind of let her know, okay, the project's almost done here, and here's how it is. And I sent her, no, you guys don't make rye by chance, do you? And the reply I got was, I'll call you tomorrow. and that's basically where it started, and it's just been a really, really fun ride working on the blend. It's probably, I don't have to deal with as much red tape, although my brother can be a bit of a pain in the neck, and you have to get his green light as well. But it's been very fun. It's been an awful lot of fun. And yes, it's a, much larger company with a teeny family distillery. But the way I look at it, we're forging new ground here, and that's pretty exciting to be a part of that. There are obviously tons of beer collaborations, but the writers keep asking us. I'm unaware of a blend like this, the differently sized companies working together like this before, as actual distillers working on a specific whiskey. And as you can tell, I saw your happiness as you started nosing it. We're very happy with how the whiskey came out. It's just beautiful.
I want to point out, and I hate to tear the foil on this, because they put both of your signatures on the foil, and I don't think Diageo's ever done that for anyone. Not even Jim Beveridge got a signature like this on the foil on a bottle of Johnny Walker. So
I don't know. There's gotta be. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe that would have. Maybe they wouldn't have gotten through compliance. So,
corporate compliance, right?
Someone did point out inside my company, like, oh, I hope you didn't use, the signature you used to sign checks. And I was like, oh, right, definitely.
The spices on this are great, and Nicole, I need you to emphasize this. This is distilled at Cascade Hollow, because the normal George Dickel rye comes from MGP, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So what's in Dickel rye right now, if you buy it on its own, that's an MGP rye that goes through a charcoal mellowing process. But this rye whiskey here that I used for the base of this blend is rye whiskey that was distilled and aged on site at Cascade Hollow. So that's never been released. That's not a rye whiskey that you can buy in a bottle anywhere right now. So it was pretty exciting. I mean, obviously I've been watching that rye whiskey mature since I got here and continuing that work. And I knew I wanted to do something with it. It was quite special whiskey, and what a great opportunity.
How hard was it to get this through the corporate layers at that really big spirits company that you work for?
Well, I said to Todd at Whiskey Fest last night, it's like, I've never given birth to a child, but how everyone says that, like, once you have the baby, you don't remember the pain. And so now I just look at this whiskey bottle and I don't remember anything about how hard it was. I'm just so thrilled that the whiskey is out in the world.
Yeah, because Diageo doesn't do collaborations like this very often.
I don't think
they do them in-house, like Lagavulin and Guinness and stuff like that.
I mean, that's so tough. I can't recall a time where I couldn't come up with a thought of any big spirits company doing something like this. And I don't think Todd or I really realized that how exceptional that part was until we were, kind of all the way at the end of it, because folks pointed it out to me and like, oh, I can't believe you gave them equal billing. I'm like, didn't occur to me to do it any other way. And, it was just.
And they put both of your pictures on the label.
Yeah.
I mean, this is a joint product.
Oh, 100%. Todd and I worked together on this. It was, very much, it's very much something that we did together, worked together. And really, I felt like almost they should have gotten even more of the credit, because obviously none of this would exist without the 3-chamber rye, which Todd spent a decade of his life recreating that style. Felt like the least we could do.
And I'm showing the back label because it specifically says distilled by Leopold Brothers, Denver, Colorado, and distilled and bottled by Cascade Hollow Distilling Company, Tullahoma, Tennessee. So this truly is a joint project.
Truly, yes. It's Todd's 3-chamber rye whiskey that was distilled and aged in Denver, Colorado, that was sort of shipped in bulk to me at Cascade Hollow, blended with our own rye whiskey, and then bottled.
Todd, you both come out of the craft distilling
We do.
movement, and collaborations like this are not uncommon between small craft distillers, right, Todd?
I can only think of one off the top of my head, but I think people are swapping barrels and that sort of thing is very common. We've been working with New Belgium Brewing for over a decade now. They use our spent barrels to finish their sour beers. I think it's more of I don't know too many. The few collaboration that he did, I believe it was called Three Kings, and I can't remember which other distillers he worked with. That's one I can think of off the top of my head, but when it comes down
and
to
there's the Good Deeds Malt
And of course,
whiskey
the Good Guys,
collaboration.
yeah.
Good Deeds, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
That's a great one to do a shout out for. But I think we're all kind of like this. That your guest didn't get a chance to see, but when the gents from Sagamore popped up, we immediately started talking whiskey, and you're like, hey, we have to start the show.
Let's bring the guys back in.
There we go. So I think there's once you get a bunch of distillers in a room, we kind of can't shut up and want to talk about what's going on in the shop and what they've got going. And we just did WhiskyCast last night, which was a lot of fun. But I told Nicole it was a bit like a high school reunion. I saw people I haven't seen for a decade, and it's a very small industry, big, small, whatever. And for the most of us, at least on the distiller side, I don't really see too much of a distinction between the two. We're all making the best spirits that we can. We're all trying to work on our craft and contribute to the conversation that is whiskey. So I don't really see the delineation between the distillers, maybe as much as some folks might.
And I know before we started, Brian, you and Ryan were both giving Todd credit for helping revive sort of the interest in Maryland Rye before you guys kicked off. Explain how that was working.
Well, I mean, I'll let maybe I don't want to speak to Todd's product or anything, but it was, a lot of people weren't very familiar with Maryland Rye or anything along those lines. And I'll never forget when we opened up Colorado, and it was one of the few states where I went in, you're working the market, you go in and pitch, and we're like, we do a Maryland style rye. And they're like, oh yeah, we're familiar. And it was just kind of like, it's like, oh, this is I love this place. Like, it was just that much easier thanks to his work. And obviously, I think one of the things, especially not only does, Leopold Brothers make beautiful whiskeys and products and so forth and other spirits, but the homework and the detail and what they do with the three chamber stills is a great example of it. It's not just let's make a whiskey. It's like the history and the romance of it that kind of, I don't know, seems to inspire you or so. I don't want to speak for you, but I'm always intrigued by everything that you guys do. It's really fun to watch.
Well, we were Nicole and I were speaking with Lance Winters at St. George, and so I'm going to go ahead and borrow this quote again from Mr. Winters, that if you're gonna release a spirit out there, have a reason for it. Have it be part of the conversation, have some thought go into it. And that's certainly the way that we look at it. And what we've learned, we're in our, I guess, 22nd year in business now. And what my brother and I learned very quickly is the more we put our personality into what it was we made and more thought we put into it, the more success we had. And so, we're all nerds. I think it's fair to say all distillers have a bit of nerditry, and to me, it's impossible not to get sucked into the history of whiskey production around the world and take pride into what it is we've done in America, in particular, in the Pennsylvania distillers and the Maryland distillers. And as I was looking into these histories, and at the time that we came up with the Maryland Rye, there weren't any distilleries that were making whiskey in Maryland. And so to me, I just, was looking at it, what a shame to see what that style or version of whiskey, to see that disappear. And then you start asking questions. You talk to Michael Veach and Charles Cowdery and some of the other historians to try and get a sense of what they were like. I got mothballed samples from old distilleries, Baltimore Pure, Hannahsville, all kinds of different distilleries, and of course it was just having a bit of fun. Because, of course, not every distillery in Maryland is going to make whiskey the exact same. So I always explain that to people, that it's kind of like, for fans of beer, it's like a West Coast IPA that you conjure in your head citrusy hops. Does every West Coast brewery make an IPA with citrus? No, of course they don't. So it was having fun, and it was an homage to a lost region. And of course, now it's great that they're all coming back up, and it's nice to have a couple Maryland distillers on the show with me today, so I can have a bit of fun. But we were hoping to revive the style and have a place for it to sit on the menu, right? So you got your bourbon, you got your Pennsylvania rye, you got your Maryland rye, and my idea was to focus on the floral notes and kind of pull away from the spiciness of it. And then the Maryland distillers came in and said, I don't care what you think. I'm going to make whiskey my own way, which is super cool, I think. But that was the idea behind it. I was having a bit of fun, and it's nice to hear that when you rolled into Colorado, that at least there were a few people who knew what the hell Maryland style rye might be. But everybody has their own version, and I'm more than thrilled to see Maryland distilleries reviving the style again. It's a beautiful thing to see.
Why do you think, and I'll throw this out to all of you, why are we seeing such a resurgence in rye? Why is rye really making this comeback? We've talked about this for the last 10 years off and on. It was the bartenders that really started it, I think. But what about rye whiskey has made it really, really popular the last maybe 5 to 7 years?
Who wants to take
politely waiting for the next person?
Go ahead, Nicole.
Well, from my perspective, I think something I'm starting to see is just a general more room for diversity of flavor as the whiskey category expands. There's a growing interest in American whiskey, and more, people on the shelf, more people buying it. But I think there was a certain sense of a little bit of homogeneity, that the differentiation was on the package and not in the package. And that was, causing some maybe frustration. And so with rye, I mean, obviously it's a totally different flavor. It's something that I think it's a little easier for an experienced whiskey drinker to appreciate. There's just a lot going on there. So, if you're already kind of comfortable with whiskey and looking to explore more, and get some bigger flavors, like rye is a natural direction to go. It's also just really interesting. It's a grain that there's a lot of, with the growth in craft distillers, and explorations around grains and varietals, and just, a willingness to embrace bigger flavors. Rye is just such a natural place to go. So I think it's just more interesting, and people are ready for some really interesting whiskey.
And as Tabitha points out, European rye is really taking off too. It's not just a U.S. phenomenon.
Yeah.
It really is happening all over the world. Ryan, you haven't said much in the last few minutes. What do you think is doing all this? Because you're talking to people tomorrow who are lining up for this stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think, for me personally, it was an evolution of my palate. I think, I kind of in college and out of college was drinking more bourbon just because it was more available, and I understood it, and I kind of it had this kind of allure to me in a way. And then as I kind of got over that, I've always been more of a savory kind of spice forward person anyway. And so as I kind of started to dip my toe a little bit into rye and try different ryes, I found that, wow, the complexity, that spice forward, the mouthfeel that I got from it was just something that really stood out to me over and over again. And I felt that the sweetness of bourbon just never really quite did it for me. And that really helped me to get into that. And then finding that balance, and I think Todd said it great with that Maryland style for us too, is this kind of floral. It's not as spice forward as some of those Pennsylvania, New York Empire ryes are to me. It's a little bit more of a balance. It's got that little bit of sweetness in there, but it has a lot of floral fronts. And I'm finding with our 4-year product, it's pretty fruit forward too. And I think we're getting a lot of esters from the yeast, and that's fun to kind of see that and pick some of those flavors out. And rye has that nice sweet spot that I think is a little bit younger than you find your bourbons. And so I think it's fun as we kind of dance towards that and to see how our product has evolved over the last few years as well.
And Greg makes a great comment, maybe just because it's good in flavor and some great cocktails. And it's also related to rye bread over in Europe where it's popular. And he just got to rye a few years ago. And now that you've distilled both rye and bourbon at Nicole, what's your take on this, on both of these now?
I think he's right. Sometimes we just overthink it. It's because it's good. Right? maybe we're overthinking it. I mean, rye's definitely. I agree with you on it kind of hitting its sweet spot a little bit younger than bourbons, which I think also helps us see a lot of like new entrants in that category that are really high quality. Sooner, because I'm inclined to agree with you. I think rye really shines at a little bit of a younger age, and hopefully you're nodding and agreeing. Are you still drinking our collaboration, Mark? Because you look happy. So
I switched over to the Sagamore bottled in bond because I had not opened that one yet. I was sipping the Penny's Proof earlier, but this bottled in bond, as you pointed out, Ryan, very spice forward, very well rounded, a little bit of fruitiness and a little bit of floral character on the palate on this, but yeah, it's just the flavor is completely different than bourbon. Go ahead, Nicole.
Sure. Go ahead with what?
I thought you were stopping to catch me there. So go ahead.
No, rye is good. That's fine. You can leave it.
Graham Fraser points this out from England or from Scotland, wondering if one of the reasons for the rise of rye whiskey might have been the scarcity of good bourbon in the past few years. And I'm not sure that's the case because we've got a lot of good bourbon out there.
I was going to say, I'm doing my best to answer that side too. We're trying here.
I just think that it's a case of people like bourbon, and that, as you point out, that sweetness gets old after a while for some people, and they want something different, and they want something with some nuance. Matt, 10 years ago, was not a rye fan, but all the new options have now turned him. And with more options, he's finding more that he really likes, so much so that he finds he's suggesting it to others as well. And I think that's the case. It's word of mouth. People are talking about rye more.
Yeah, and we find that too when we're out in the market and talking to people. It's like sometimes the first thing you say is, "Oh, I want. How about you try our rye whiskey?" It's like, "Well, I don't like rye whiskey," and it's like, "Well, try ours." And you kind of get into that, and I try to explain that. And it's funny when Brian said that going into Colorado, because I mean, so many places up and down, even the Mid-Atlantic, when we talk about Maryland style rye, they're like, "What does that mean? What are you making?" And so we have to then you kind of get into the history, and then next thing I know, I'm like, wow, I've been talking for 30 minutes, and there is intent in what we're doing, and we do have a plan, and we're trying to stick to it, but educating the consumer and bringing them in has been challenging, but I think it's fun. And as they take that first sip and they have this, whatever their experience was in the past of what they thought a rye whiskey was, it's fun to see them kind of almost be converted right there in the moment.
We've talked about Maryland style rye, but I don't think we've actually defined it. What is a Maryland style rye compared to Pennsylvania and Kentucky rye and Empire rye from New York and the European rye? What makes a Maryland rye unique other than just being distilled in Maryland?
Brian, you want to take that one?
I think the discussion, and I don't know if it's a debate, but there's some consistencies out there, but it is, I don't know, in some ways it can be even a little bit frustrating at times. I don't know if it's ever truly been defined, but I would, from my understanding is it tends to be, the Monongahela, which is a beautiful rye whiskey as well, tends to typically be about 100% rye grain mash bill, and carry a little bit more of that spice forward tasting notes, where Maryland does tend to be, my understanding is a little bit sweeter, a little bit more floral, a little bit rounder, and that's kind of, I'm going to stop there just kind of before I go too, now he's gone one too far, but but that's the beautiful thing. I mean, you were just in Virginia too, and Virginia obviously played a big role in rye whiskey as well, and George Washington and so forth and so on. And each one kind of put their own little thumbprint on it. But one of my favorite things is when I always hear people talk about, they've got that Kentucky style rye mash bill, and then they refer to Pikesville. And that always makes me chuckle a little bit. I'm like, have you read the back label of Pikesville? It's a Maryland rye.
Well, it started out in Maryland. Now it's made in Kentucky at Heaven Hill.
Correct.
But Pikesville is an old classic Baltimore area brand.
Yep. So it's one of, we were very lucky to sit down with that family as well. And they gave us some really cool, fun, old historical bottles. It's the very supportive community here in Baltimore. Because those that do know, it's Maryland's one of those states, and I think this is probably common of any state, but Maryland loves Maryland. So, they get excited about just about anything Maryland.
And you guys are growing more of the grain at the Sagamore farm just outside of Baltimore, right?
We are. It's been a fun project. When we started this, one of our goals was to try and source locally. And of course, we went out and said, hey, who's growing rye grain? And every farmer's like, no one's growing rye. And if we do, we only get paid because we till it back into the earth. And so nobody really wanted to touch that and expand on that. And so we decided we really would like to bring that back and source locally if we could. And we were fortunate enough to find a farmer who was kind enough to take that risk with us and partner up. And what we did is to kind of a true shared value is we said, why don't we buy the seed up front, out-of-pocket expenses on us. So the only thing you have into it is your time and labor, but we'll share some of this risk with you. We will guarantee to buy it all. We'll only hold you to a quality standard, but we won't hold you to a yield per acre. And we started off small and got 50,000 pounds year one. Then we scaled it up a little bit and got 150,000 pounds year two. And then we scaled it up to another farm. And last year, I think we did a little bit over around 500,000 pounds. And this year, we brought in our own farm, Sagamore Farm. And now we're up to about 1 million pounds of Maryland grown rye. And we get 100% of the non-GMO corn from our own farm now too. And so it's been very fun working with the farmers. We've invested in silos on their property, into grain cleaners, into mills, and really try to build something that's just a very long-term, true partnership out with them. And it's been incredible. Ryan's played a big role in that. And I think it's one of the things at the end of the day we might take the most pride in some ways. It's been an amazing journey, and we're just kind of getting started. We're working with the University of Maryland Department of Agriculture now on 5 different varietals and really trying to understand the different yields and the different flavor notes and so forth that we can get from different varietals. And so, we're just a few years in, and we're just trying to learn as much as we can. And but it's been fun.
Have you been working with Aaron McLeod at all on the varietal testing? Because he's doing some great work with rye varietals.
I'm sorry, what was that?
Aaron McLeod at Hamilton. Would highly recommend. He's doing some really great research on rye varietals. I've been working with him a little bit as well. Super, super helpful.
Well, can we connect after?
Yeah.
I'm writing that down.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But Ryan, you guys actually took the Sagamore farm and turned it from a horse farm into a grain farm, right? In some ways.
Yeah, no, we did. And part of that process was getting it back to the roots of agriculture. And we wanted to be very forward with that. And as Brian said, to me, whiskey and in the spirits industry and even alcohol industry in general is a community. And so we've built a community of farmers. We want to lean into that. We want to be as local as we can with the understanding that, you never want all your eggs in one basket. And so it has been a challenge because, there are challenges with growing rye, that there's not a lot of incentives or subsidies to grow it. There's actually the opposite. And so it's been a fun challenge for us. And then switching the farm over to doing that has been great. And so we want to really showcase that. We want to be able to understand what crop rotation looks like and how do we make that to actually have the soil be better after our use. And so there's a lot we're trying to learn and understand and juggle as we go through this process. And I'm sure, as Todd can speak to, even just the process of cooking and distilling rye is challenging. It's a lot easier to make a bourbon that's a little bit more forgiving than a lot of the ryes you deal with. So, a lot of it is understanding and one of the things I want to be better with is the sharing of knowledge, because we are working with the University of Maryland. We're going to hopefully find out a lot of information about varietals and hybrids and how do they work and what yields are they giving us. And, because a farmer a lot of times is like, well, how much am I going to yield? How much am I going to yield? And I'm kind of like, well, how good's the whiskey going to be? And so there's a balance of making sure everybody, the relationships are mutually beneficial and that we all come away from it feeling, successful and fulfilled. And we want to do it again next year. And so we want to share that information with everybody because I feel that the knowledge is power and we're all in this to make the best whiskey we can and convert as many people over to drinking whiskey as possible. So
Todd?
Yes.
I wanted to get you in on this because get your thoughts in on this one as well, because you've been sitting there watching for a minute.
Well, for one thing, after hearing their description of what they're doing, if you want to know what Maryland rye is, what they're doing is Maryland rye. It's awful cool to hear that. We did the same basic thing. We're cheating out here a little bit in Colorado because of the Coors family. They've been growing malting barley for over 100 years. So the farmers, they're, it's basically, I'll start the conversation of here's how much nitrogen I'm looking for, and shut up, kid. Just let me do my job, sort of a thing. We have a very dry climate out here, which makes it a lot easier in terms of molds and mildews and all kinds of issues that you can run into. And we use a variety called a Bruisey rye, which I'm sure they've heard of because it pops up in all kinds of old Maryland agricultural documents. Talking about Ren's a Bruisey or a Bruisey rye. It came over from Rome, and it has elevated levels of two things that I was looking for. Well, first of all, it has really low starch, and the farmer was hesitant because I told them it was 62% starch, and they're used to working with more modern varieties of grains, which are all north of 80% in terms of yield. So he thought that I was going to say it's a failure, but I'm thrilled because lower starch means that you're adding more of the grain. So in other words, if I'm making a 5% alcohol distiller's mash and one grain has 62% and the other has 80, for the 62%, I have to add 30% more to get it up to that 5% alcohol. So I'm making the whiskey more flavorful right out of the gate. We do the same thing in the sense that we pay a premium for it. The yield per acre is half of what you get from modern rye. The stalks are much taller, so it's much more liable to lodge, which is a fancy way of saying knocking over, right? And we've had that happen twice, and they've recovered both times too, which is pretty remarkable. But the variety that we have has two things in elevated quantities, and they touched on the floral nature of Maryland rye. Linalool is a compound that lends to that. It's a grouping of different chemicals, but basically most people would say it smells like lavender or rose or chamomile, or floral notes are coming from that linalool family. A Bruisey rye has elevated amounts of that, and the second thing it has elevated amounts of is a compound called ferulic acid. And ferulic acid is the building block for the spicy note that everybody associates with rye. So you need the ferulic acid, and then you need a Hefeweizen yeast. And I saw somebody on the stream saying that they get some of those spicy notes in Scotch. Well, that's because the two big yeasts in that the distillers are using in Scotland, or at least before about a decade ago, before a lot of the new shops opened up, the two big yeast strains that they use out there are both Hefeweizen yeast. So in other words, they'll give a spicy note if you feed it correctly and if you mash at certain temperatures.
And if you, yes.
Yeah. So I'm fascinated to hear how far along Sagamore Spirits has come with what they're doing. It's exciting. It's exciting to see, distillers take control of what it is they're doing in their environment and working with their farmers and taking whiskey into new directions. Yeah, and if this isn't the golden age of whiskey, I don't know what the heck is, but it's exciting hearing about what our fellow distillers are working on.
We've got a good question from Graham Fraser. There seem to be some U.S. rye whiskeys that are being bottled at 1 year old and less. What do your guests think is an optimum age? Well, 2 years minimum for a straight rye, which all these are, and then 4 years for bottled and bond. But what do you think is the optimum age? Rye tends to be bottled at a younger age than bourbons for some reason, right?
Sort of. I don't mind if you don't mind me jumping on this one and talking a second time. The one thing I will say, because I have a bit of experience with this, the Maryland rye that released was usually somewhere between 2.5 and 4 years old. Once you get much north of that, the barrel starts to snuff out that beautiful floral character. With a pot distillation method. And I wish we could have reversed the way that we released it. So in other words, come out with a 10-year-old and then come out with a 2-year-old, because the instant you come out with something that's 2 years old, consumers think you're taking a shortcut or, X, Y, and Z. And it's like, no, I really think that this is a very, very beautiful flavor. What I think is that, you can have beautiful whiskey, a rye whiskey at 10, 15 years old, but you can also have a beautiful one that's younger. And the word I like, it's another stolen word from David Wondrich. he calls rye rambunctious, and I like that the for the Maryland rye that we release, that it's got a little bit of that fiery spirit to it that you tend to lose once it crosses in our aging and the way we distill, yada yada yada. That once you get to that 4-year-old mark, the barrel's kind of snuffing out some of that rambunctiousness. So I think there's something to be said for the younger rye, and obviously something to be said for the older rye. And now I'll stop talking.
Any other thoughts?
I mean, I think my thoughts are it's probably much more difficult to peg an optimum age for rye, because what's interesting about rye is, folks used to think, just like the bourbon category, it used to be somewhat homogenous. There were only a few producers. And so we had these like truisms about it. Rye is spicy, or rye, like that it's just one thing. And now we're coming to understand that because of the nature of rye grain and all of the varietals that are out there and how complex it is, that actually rye can be many, many things: floral, fruity, spicy, and there's a lot of different types of rye. So the optimum age for them is going to be quite different depending on what aspects of that you're trying to express. So I think it'd be really, as much as it's almost impossible to peg like an optimum age for bourbon, because the US is a big country, and, conditions are different, and maturation conditions are different, and barrel sizes are different. And I will always stand for smaller barrels. It's very possible to make a beautiful whiskey that way. But rye just adds an even bigger layer of complexity to that conversation, because the underlying flavor conditions can be so distinct. I think it's just going to be even harder. So that's why rye is an interesting part of kind of the maturing palate conversation, right? Because we're maybe ready to have those more sophisticated discussions around like what is and is not good.
So let me ask Nicole and Todd, where is this going to be available? What's the price point, and how soon can people find this?
So you literally got one of the first bottles that came off of the bottling line. We just started bottling it. And what we were pouring at Whiskey Fest last night was really some of the first folks in the world to taste it. But we are shipping now, so you should start to see it on shelves within the next few weeks. And we are distributing it fairly widely. So I think it's 30 states at last count was how many states we're releasing it into. So we're really trying to do our best to make this available, because I do think it's really interesting. And the price point, our MSRP on it is $109.
That's not bad.
I think for rye whiskey, my component of it, you literally can't buy in any other bottle. And Todd's 3-chamber is extraordinarily rare. I think it's very fair considering how unique this product is. And also, just honestly, you're never going to taste another whiskey like this. Hopefully you will one day in the future, but at this moment in time, there is nothing on the shelf that tastes like this whiskey tastes. It's truly unique. I saw someone comment about, rye as a blending tool, and I just couldn't agree more. Like the act of being able to blend with that heavy-bodied 3-chamber rye and really dive into how half a percentage point can make a huge amount of difference, and just to have something like that to work with as a blender, it was really thrilling. I think it really comes across in the product. So, of course, I'm biased, but I think it's worth every penny.
And Ryan, I know that the pennies proof will sell out pretty much tomorrow morning, but where will this be available? Because I know there are plans to make the bottle and bond available more widely than just tomorrow, right?
Yeah. So, we'll have 597 pennies proof. So those folks will have the option to also buy that. We'll have 1,200 bottles tomorrow at the distillery. So if you can't get a pennies proof, there's still a chance you can get a bottled and bond. We're limited to one per person. And then we are sending about 125 cases to 7 markets. Some markets like Colorado might only receive 2 cases. And the idea there, Mark, is we want to hold back a little bit. We're going to release it again next year, but instead of 4-year-old, it'll be 5-year-old. We kind of eventually, we think we want to progress up, but a little bit like Todd and Nicole were saying too, we don't know necessarily where that sweet spot is yet. Like we love it at 4 and we're proud of it at 4. Otherwise we wouldn't put it out. But someday someone's like, we should make a 7-year-old. Well, we don't know that. Like what? Like why? Might not be as good. And so we have to be very cautious. And so we're still, like you said, we're very we're young. We're just learning and we're trying to figure it out. So we're just cautiously putting it out, but we're excited to get it out. And I'm glad you also asked where we could get that other bottle, because I definitely want to get a bottle of the collaboration. I'm dying to get a bottle of that.
And you guys
send us
also
a
have
note.
the
I think we might know how to hook you up.
We know a guy.
and you guys also have an 8-year-old rye out, but that's the MGP rye.
Yeah, and so I think, one, it's a beautiful whiskey. We typically do a reserve release twice a year, one in the spring, one in the fall. It's always been basically some type of finished product, and we thought, what a concept. What if we just released a straight rye without finishing it for once? And I think now that we're getting ready to start bringing the Maryland distilled on, we're kind of starting to move our MGP stock out and make way. And hopefully, in the next 2 years from now, we'll pretty much just be, I don't know if it's 2 years, but eventually we will be 100% only distilled and aged in Maryland. And I think roughly about 2 years from now, that should be the case.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
That's a great step, but this is also interesting because we don't normally get to taste MGP rye at 8 years old, because it usually gets bottled long before that.
Yeah.
So it is a rare chance to try that. And Sandro Fazzolari has a quick question here, and we can knock this one out quick. Does rye age in virgin oak casks or a variety of oak casks, second fill, etc.? The standards of identity are just like for everything else. In the U.S., at least, it has to be new oak, right?
Yes.
Yep. If we want it to be a straight, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And then Graham Fraser, has anyone tried blending rye whiskey with bourbon? Yes.
Yes.
High West, yeah.
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 It's the first one that comes to mind. That's widely available.
Yep.
And then there's the wild turkey forgiven.
Yes.
What?
On a lab scale, yes.
We've all tried it on a small scale, right?
Then there's the wild turkey forgiven, where somebody screwed up and pumped bourbon into a tank full of rye a few years ago, and they repeated that because they found it tasted so good. But Jimmy was not happy about that, from what I understand.
Oh man, my heart goes out to that poor operator.
That's a bad day.
Oof.
And Watchman High Rest Boar Rye, yep, that's the one. We have tasting notes for that at the website. Well, guys, we're going to go ahead and cut it at this point. I want to thank all of you. And Brian, Ryan, congratulations on the Bottled in Bond and reaching an anniversary, because you guys have an anniversary tomorrow as well, right?
Our anniversary is actually, as far as opening up the distillery, is in the spring, in April. So tomorrow is just, we do it this time every year just because November is Maryland Spirits Month. And so it's kind of our way of celebrating Spirits Month in Maryland.
And Nicole, Todd, this is destined, I think, to be a classic. I want to find more of this. Let's put it that way, because I can't wait to post the tasting notes for this one, because this is a good one. Guys, thank you all for joining us today and helping us celebrate the 16th anniversary of the show. We are a podcast that's old enough to have an age statement now. So I'll leave it at that. But thank you for joining us, and thank you for watching. And we'll see you hopefully next week. The podcast will be out this weekend, Monday or Tuesday or so. And we will see you again soon. Take care of yourselves. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you later on. Good night, all.
Cheers. Thanks.